Yes, bigger than Sabalenka? Bigger than Coco? It sounds unbelievable, right? But according to many inside the sport, the answer might actually be yes. The comparison might seem bold, even outrageous. Yet one respected voice in tennis wasn't afraid to say it out loud. Those words came from Steve Johnson, a 12-year ATP veteran who has spent more than a decade competing against the biggest stars the sport has to offer. Johnson has seen champions rise, legends dominate, and phenoms burst onto the scene. But this time, he was talking about someone different. Not a Grand Slam champion. Not a world number one. He was talking about a 20-year-old player from the Philippines who, just 18 months ago, was ranked 140th in the world. Her name? Alex Eala. And what happened in the weeks leading up to Indian Wells Masters 2026 forced the entire tennis world to rethink a very important question. Who actually moves the needle in tennis today? Because suddenly, everywhere you looked, the conversation was the same. Crowds were growing. Ticket demand was exploding. Online engagement was skyrocketing. And at the center of it all was Alex Eala. The question now is simple, but huge. Can she turn this momentum into a deep run at Indian Wells? Or is there still a gap between the hype and the crown? Let me know your prediction in the comments. Now rewind to March 2025. Eala arrived at the Miami Open as a wild card. No seeding. No expectations. Her ranking was so low that most casual tennis fans had never even heard her name. But that changed quickly. First, she stunned Madison Keys. Then she did something even more shocking. She defeated Iga Swiatek, the most dominant force in women's tennis at the time. Suddenly, the unknown wild card wasn't just another young prospect. She became the first Filipino player in history to reach a WTA 1000 semifinal. By the end of the season, the rise continued. Her ranking skyrocketed to world number 50. She captured her first WTA 125 title in Guadalajara. Then came a moment that symbolized just how fast her global impact was growing. She signed with Nike as a global ambassador. At their headquarters in Oregon, portraits of Eala lined the walls, celebrating her heritage, her flag, and the millions of fans who suddenly saw themselves represented on the biggest stage in tennis. But the story didn't stop there. February 2026.
Dubai.
Eala faced Jasmine Paolini, the tournament's number 8 seed. What happened next shocked analysts. She dismantled Paolini in straight sets. 6-1 in the opener, then a tight tiebreak to close it out. A top 8 player reduced to chasing shadows across the court. Then, on February 23rd, the rankings updated. And history was made. Alex Eala climbed to world number 31, the highest ranking ever achieved by a Filipino woman in the 47-year history of the WTA. Then came the moment that truly set the tennis world buzzing. The Indian Wells draw was released. Eala was seeded 31st, giving her a first-round bye. But what caught everyone's attention was her projected path, because as early as the third round, she could face one of the sport's biggest stars, Coco Gauff. Suddenly, the same analysts who had once scrolled past her name were now circling it in red. YouTube exploded with breakdown videos. Podcasts scrambled to explain how a player barely mentioned a year earlier was suddenly outdrawing the world's biggest names in stadium attendance. And that's when Steve Johnson said the words that set tennis media on fire. But in reality, by early 2026, something remarkable had already been proven. Alex Eala was filling stadium seats in ways that even established champions sometimes struggled to match. At that point, it was no longer about potential. It was about a commercial and competitive force the tennis establishment simply hadn't seen coming. The same analysts who once dismissed her run at the Miami Open as a lucky streak were suddenly watching her practice side by side with Aryna Sabalenka at the Indian Wells Masters. 2 players. 2 very different points on the credibility timeline. Sharing the same court. And the evidence had actually started building long before that moment. Back in Miami 2025, Eala entered the tournament as a wild card ranked 140th in the world. Within 1 week, she shocked the tennis world by defeating 2 top 10 players, including Iga Swiatek. That alone should have been headline news. But the real story wasn't just the wins. It was the atmosphere. Fans in the stands said they had never seen anything like it. Entire sections of the stadium were suddenly filled with Filipino flags. Matches that normally struggled to fill seats were suddenly packed. Tournament staff quietly confirmed that attendance numbers were exceeding projections. The energy felt less like a tennis match and more like a rock concert. On Monday of that week, she was ranked 140th. By Sunday, she was a top 100 player and a WTA 1000 semifinalist. And the momentum didn't stop there. The pattern kept repeating throughout the rest of 2025. In Guadalajara, she captured her first professional title. Her ranking climbed steadily, past 70, past 60, past 50. And at every stop along the way, the same signs appeared. More flags, more fans, more evidence that something unusual was building in the sport. Then came Dubai 2026. After defeating Jasmine Paolini, Eala stood on the court and asked the crowd a simple question. How many of you have prayed for me? The roar that followed echoed far beyond the stadium. It represented the support of more than 115 million Filipinos watching around the world. A few days later, former ADP professional Steve Johnson put words to what the crowds had already shown. Speaking on the Nothing Major podcast, Johnson made a declaration that instantly ignited debate across tennis media. He didn't call Eala a rising star. He didn't say she might become a major draw. He said something far stronger. Right now, in his words, she was the biggest draw in women's tennis. An absolute rock star. For someone who spent 12 years on the ADP Tour, competing against the sport's biggest names, that statement carried weight. Johnson has seen hype. And he has seen genuine stardom. His evaluation wasn't cautious. It was direct. He didn't say she could become bigger than Aryna Sabalenka. He didn't say she might eventually rival Coco Gauff. He said that, in terms of drawing crowds, she already was. The pattern across Miami, Dubai, and now Indian Wells told a consistent story. First, the crowds arrived. Then the results followed. And only after that did the experts begin explaining what the fans had recognized months earlier. Around the same time, another signal appeared. Nike featured Eala prominently at their global headquarters in Oregon. Portraits celebrating her heritage and Filipino identity lined the walls. It wasn't just a marketing campaign. It was a sign that something bigger was happening. For decades, tennis stardom followed a predictable formula: win Grand Slams first, build a global fan base later. But Eala was flipping that formula upside down. Her fan army arrived before the trophies. Her commercial impact appeared before the ranking peaks. And tournament organizers from Indian Wells to Roland Garros were paying attention. Because a player who fills stadiums regardless of ranking or seeding represents something rare. Something extremely valuable. Now, Indian Wells 2026 becomes the next test. If the crowds match the intensity seen in Dubai, if the results continue improving, then this season may become the year the tennis establishment finally acknowledges what Filipino fans have known since Miami. The schedule ahead only raises the stakes. Indian Wells this week. A return to Miami in just a few weeks. Then the clay court swing through Madrid and Rome. Each tournament becomes another chapter in a story that still seems to be accelerating. Of course, the journey isn't complete yet. The Dubai quarterfinal against Coco Gauff served as a reminder of the remaining gap. The scoreline 6-0, 6-2 left little room for interpretation. Eala addressed it honestly afterward. The gap was pretty prominent, she admitted. No excuses. No deflection. Then she added something else. But I'm on the right path. Just 14 days later, she arrived at Indian Wells as a seeded player for the first time at a WTA 1000 event. Proof that the path she described was already continuing. The wildcard breakthrough in Miami. The packed stadiums in Dubai. Steve Johnson's bold declaration. The Nike portraits celebrating her heritage. The ranking milestone that rewrote Filipino tennis history. And through it all, that unforgettable question. How many of you have prayed for me? Alex Eala has turned fan devotion into competitive momentum in a way tennis rarely sees. The experts who once overlooked her are now trying to explain how they missed the obvious. But 115 million Filipinos didn't miss it. They saw the greatness early. They filled the stadiums before the rankings demanded respect. They believed before believing was safe. Now the question becomes the one everyone is asking. Can Alex Eala turn that belief into a deep run at Indian Wells? Or does the gap with players like Coco Gauff still need to close before the coronation is complete? Drop your prediction in the comments. And if you've been following the story since Miami, then you're part of the group that saw it first. Subscribe now because this story is just reaching its most exciting chapter. Tennis Fire.